Today, you have the opportunity to find out something you may never before have heard. What makes a good trainer? Why did your school hire that person and not the other? Why did you resonate with what he says instead of the person you listened to last week? And why do you feel on fire when she comes to your school instead of last year's trainer? Big introduction to a big personality. There are many teacher trainers in the world, and yet there are reasons some stand out more than others. Nina Lauder is one of those people who is filled with so many fiery characteristics that she just oozes diversity, empathy, and flexibility. Those are the most important elements of a trainer. Not content, that's the easy part. It's how she relates to people, how she processes the environment she's in, how she adjusts to unexpected changes and happenings, and her ability to take her past and use it to create an explosive present. We are going to learn a lot about what makes Nina the incredible teacher trainer that she is, how publishing, volunteering, and breathing in the salt of the sea as often as possible is essential to her educational vision. Join us now for a breathtaking journey that begins in Canada, goes to Greece, Spain, and most of the rest of the world, as Nina tells us about her journeys and her joys that she passes on to all of the participants in every single session she gives. You ready? So let's begin. Nina, thank you so much for being here. You're so busy, and I really appreciate you finding the time. Couldn't believe we finally did this. And you know that I talked about you with Danny Griffith.
Yes.
And he was so excited that we knew each other. So I couldn't wait to get you on officially recorded on an episode. So Nina, tell us about you. Where are you from? What's your educational background? And we're going to find out a lot about you. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to see you, even if it's online. My background, I was born and raised in Canada, British mom, Canadian dad, grew up on the west coast of Canada, did my studies on the eastern end of Canada in Montreal and in Boston. And right after graduating, was offered a job at a very small language school in a very small village on an island in Greece. So my first sort of official teaching job was in a tiny little town filled with goats and olive trees on an island. And so that's where it all began, at a school called Maritana in a tiny town called Archangelos. And so that was my teaching career sort of kicking off. And from there, I took a train through Europe and landed in Spain, in Seville, just before the World Expo in 1992. And figured that people might need to learn English, and sure enough, they did. And that's how my life in Spain started. So from Canada to Greece, and from Greece to Spain. And then in Spain, well, my career took off, and I was lucky enough to be able to travel around the world with work. So.
Okay, so we're gonna go back to Spain, but first I'd like to take a little step backwards to Greece, because what I'm wondering is, you got a job at a language school, and had you had language learning training?
No, I hadn't had any official training. I actually have never been trained to be a teacher. I don't have a teaching degree. I don't have certificates. I don't have anything. What I did have before I started the teaching job was already years of experience working with kids. From the age of about 12, I started volunteering. So I had worked for a number of summers with kids with special needs, special educational needs. So I'd been working with kids with cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, deaf, blind. So I'd been doing volunteer work in those situations. I'd also volunteered working with Vietnamese and Korean preschoolers who had no English. So I had been teaching them. And then I'd also worked on reading and educational programs with kids from families with extreme abuse. So I'd had lots and lots of experience working with different types of young learners in different settings, but no teaching experience in ELT at all until I landed in that little village.
All right. And I know that you learned Greek when you were in
Yeah,
Greece,
yes,
and
I did.
you know you grew up learning French because you're
Yeah,
very proficient in French as well.
yeah,
How do you feel that the French helped you in Canada? How do you feel that the Greek helped your experience in Greece? Because there are a lot of teachers who don't learn the language of the country that they're teaching in.
yeah,
And I would find that very difficult because we're both in Spain. And
yeah,
for me, knowing Spanish helps me enormously with the stress factor of my students. And so
for
I'm
sure.
wondering, in Greece, was it really important that you learned Greek?
Yeah, that's a really good point and a really good question. I totally agree with you that it's funny how so often there's this emphasis. Like when I first arrived in Spain, they were like, "No, we like that you don't speak any Spanish. You know, we want you to not know any Spanish." And it's funny, this sort of idea of expecting, myself not understanding what my students are saying, and my students probably not understanding what I was saying, seeing that as something beneficial when actually I think it can work. Obviously, I did it; it works at times, but I think it is an impediment. And I agree with you that when you know where your students might make mistakes because you speak their language, or when they can actually ask you a question in their own language when they're desperate and they can't form that question in the second language, it can actually be really useful to know another language. So having French from childhood did actually help me a lot with learning Spanish. Luckily, they have the same sort of roots, so that helped me there. And then in Greece, I actually didn't think that I needed Greek to teach English. I didn't know Greek when I arrived, but as the year went on and as I learned more Greek, it did help a lot. Like it helps with classroom management. You knew when the kids were laughing about something, were they making a joke about you, about somebody else in the class? Were they just making a comment that people found funny? Because at the beginning, I didn't know what they were talking about. So it does help a lot.
And it's also useful to work when you're working with the teachers because you work with the teachers. You don't have the students yourself. And I
Right.
found that when the teachers know that I speak Spanish and you speak it much better than I do, then their anxiety level goes way down as well.
For
But then I
sure.
have a question for you, Nina. Teachers in Spain, you and I both know this very well, have an idea that they should never use Spanish in the classroom in their English
Yeah.
lessons. So, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think this stuff sort of goes in flows, that we go from like, no English, no English, you should never use sorry, no Spanish, no mother tongue in class. There was a huge push towards that for a number of years. And I think luckily now, thanks to this sort of global English and, communication is key, I think that pressure has been eased a little bit. So, like I said, if you don't know the language, or if you're working in a multicultural class where you've got somebody from Korea, somebody from Greece, somebody from Russia, somebody from Vietnam, you're obviously not going to be able to learn all of the languages of all of your students. So, can it be done effectively? Of course, or the English language teaching world wouldn't exist. But are there benefits to being able to use, if you're in a homogeneous class where everybody speaks the same language and you speak that language, are there benefits to being able to, at different specific times, use the mother tongue to help understanding or to clear up misunderstandings or to just build rapport with them? I think it can be extremely beneficial.
And I
I think
love that you
so.
just said build rapport with them because in the end, the first thing we need to do is build a rapport. And the affective
I
domain
agree.
is so important. We need to make sure that they're relaxed so that the learning can go in.
Exactly.
Um,
And I mean, like right now, we'll talk about it a bit later, but right now I'm teaching volunteer classes for Ukrainian refugees. And there are zero, zero, zero beginners. Like they don't know hello, they don't know goodbye. And so it's really tough sometimes because you've got these, nine little faces on Zoom. I might ask a question or put something up. Everybody's looking blank. I'm trying to explain it. And then suddenly they'll all start nattering on together in Ukrainian. And I'm just sitting there like, I don't know if they got it. I don't know if they didn't get it. I don't actually really know what they're talking about. And so at those moments, it would be really useful to have a little bit of Ukrainian and be like, no, guys, 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 time out. It's not that, it's this. And so, there are benefits to both things, but I do think that the rapport is easier to build when you can at least understand them. So I think the use of their own language, even if you don't speak their own language, can definitely be a little push me up for when they're lost.
Okay, wonderful. And let's get into the publications because
Yeah,
can you explain to me how you got involved? You work with a lot of publishers. How did you get
yeah.
to work with them? So first, if you don't mind, explain to us how you got into working with publishers, because that's a
Yeah,
great
it
story.
was actually funny. Again, just like with the teaching, I did an interview for my university a couple of years ago, and the title was Accidental Teacher because I mean, I never expected to be a teacher and never thought I would be in teaching, and a little bit the same with the publishing. It all happened. I was working as the head of studies at a language school in Seville. I went to TESOL, Spain 1 year. My first time attending an ELT conference. I saw some wonderful talks, some wonderful speakers. But when I came back to Seville, I was sort of like, hey, I can do this too. Why can't I go and give a talk next year? Why is my school sort of having just to pay for me to be trained? Maybe I have something to offer as well. There were two editors in my talk. So Janine Bogard and Janet Wilson were in that session and offered me work reviewing materials afterwards. So I got sent, some things from a textbook. I had to read through the sample unit, make some comments. And from that, they offered me some, can you do some worksheets? And from that, could you take some units for a workbook? So it all started thanks to TESOL Spain.
Yeah, but Janet Wilson is really discerning and she saw that spark in you. It's hard to miss it.
Yeah, maybe. So yeah, that's how it all started. And it's been wonderful.
So let's talk about your traveling because you travel
Yeah,
a lot. Do you
yeah,
travel for publishers? You travel by yourself?
yeah.
How is it that you arrange that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know, Canadians and Australians, I don't know what it is about us, but I think we're sort of bred from birth that you're supposed to get a backpack on your back at some point in your life and just go, like so I was born to, my mom had moved to Canada when she was 20 something. She'd already lived in a bunch of different countries. She'd been a ski instructor in Bern and she'd been working with such and such in Den Haag. And she went to Montreal to work at the Olympic Games or at the Expo or something. So, she already had the travel bug. My dad already had the travel bug. They had me in a backpack from birth, climbing mountains and going on trips. And so traveling, and then I had sort of like, I don't know if it's the same for you in the States with your family, but I had my granny in London. I had the grandparents in Winnipeg. I had my uncle in Boston. I had, Aunt so and so who was living in Hong Kong. So there was sort of already this idea that there was a world beyond my backyard. I was aware from a very young age that there was a lot of different stuff going on in the world. And then again, growing up in Canada, you're also extremely aware that there are lots of different people in the world. Like I lived in a neighborhood where I had Magda, the Hungarian neighbor. We had the Greek neighbors across the street. We had Japanese people living behind us. My neighbor Jim was Scottish. The people across the road had come from Australia. So I think that made world travel and sort of discovering the world less daunting.
All
So
right. And
yeah.
then, so there's two sides of the question I'm going to ask you. First of all, do you think, I'm wondering how travel and having a multicultural perspective has influenced your teaching? And the other side of that coin is how different do you believe your perspective is from people who have not traveled very much?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I was very aware of when I was like, because I started learning languages as well very young, and I knew what it was to be misunderstood. So I think that yeah, having that multicultural background definitely helped with the teaching and the traveling because you're just aware of other people having troubles getting their ideas across. Like, like there were times when my mom and my neighbor, you would see them trying to figure something out together and they didn't have the words and so I think that did help when I was traveling, this whole idea that there are ways to be understood and that sometimes not understanding is not a problem. You just have to take it slowly and figure things out. And I think that also influenced, the teaching. And I think that if you don't have that background and if you don't have language skills yourself, if you just know your own language and you don't really know any other languages, as long as you're empathetic.
It's really important to have empathy and acceptance. And you and I have had the same experience. I'm sure that for some reason with the Spanish accents are very important. And I
Oh,
always
yeah,
say to them, to me, the grammar, grammar is not even that important to me, but that's more
yeah,
important than the accent. But now
exactly.
I'm wondering, having grown up in that multicultural atmosphere, And you're
Mm,
talking about empathy, and you're talking about how your parents helped you with acceptance. If
yeah,
that
exactly.
helped you with patience and empathy towards the special needs children that you've worked with.
Yeah, I mean, when I worked with the special needs children, that was sort of prior to any language teaching or learning. And so, yeah, I mean, you build up empathy working with kids with special needs anyway, because you do learn that there are all sorts of ways to communicate that might not be verbal, or there are all sorts of ways to get your idea across that I was very lucky to work at a summer camp where the kids were all mixed. And so you just knew that, Ziggy, the little kid with the helmet who had, whatever he had, epilepsy and autism, you just knew that his form of communication was this way. And then you had a little kid with cerebral palsy who was sort of using his little tap board with his computer to say what he wanted to say. And then you had the deaf kid who was using sign language. So I did learn at that stage that there were a lot of different ways to communicate that were not just with words. How far a hug can go, how far a smile can go. So
I
yeah.
don't know if you've heard of Mary Gordon, because she's up in Canada and you all know each other,
Right,
obviously. Mary Gordon does Roots of Empathy, and
right.
her whole focus is on beginning with empathy, making sure that the children find a connection. And if
Yeah,
they don't get it at home, then we need to work on it at school. And that's what you're saying,
for
is that
sure,
you're focused on the connection. Can we
for
talk a little
sure.
bit about the unique types of education, some of the uniqueness in
Yeah,
different countries? And it's really kind of dangerous, and it's not fair
yeah,
to have generalizations, but there are some generalizations. So
yeah.
which are your sort of, can you give us an overview of some of the countries
Yeah,
that
I
stand
mean,
out?
yeah, it like you said, it's one of those sort of touchy subjects. You don't want to sort of be stepping on toes or making generalizations or stereotypes. But there are things that you notice. Like, I mean, when I do teacher training in different countries, one of the things that really stands out at the beginning, like I almost always use a song at the beginning. So I either put up a video or there's some background music going on. And it's very funny to see how different people react. So, you might be at a conference in Mexico or in Brazil or in Spain, and you've got your little music on, and I'm at the front, sort of watching people come in, and you'll see people sort of do a little boogie, do a little movement. They'll sort of, sit down, start chatting to the person next to them. And then you'll do the exact same thing, perhaps I've done quite a lot of work in Eastern Europe, so like in Poland, in Ukraine, in Russia, to some extent in Serbia, Latvia, you'll sort of, and then you'll do the same thing. And like those people just walk in and sit down. Like, there's no funny business. They come right on time. They're very friendly, but like you could walk into an auditorium of 500 people in Warsaw and perhaps outside the room not know there were 500 people in there. You open the door and you're like, oh my God, they're all in here 10 minutes before the talk. And
We
they're
couldn't
very
imagine
quiet.
that in
They might be
Spain. We
chatting.
couldn't imagine
Well,
it in
exactly.
Spain.
That's what I'm
Right.
saying. So there's
Yeah.
things like that, like, noise level, chattiness. And again, this is not saying that people in Ukraine don't chat to each other when they come into the session, but it's not overwhelming. Like, when you're doing the same thing in, I don't know, in Brazil, for example, or Sao Paulo, and like when you get close to that room, they're in there. There's some chatting going on. Or in Spain, there's chatting going on. Or things like when you get up on stage, you're like, okay, guys, let's begin. Let's start. Let's calm down a little bit. The time it takes. Like in Spain, that can be a good long, guys, come on, gotta do it. Whereas like in some of these other countries, you might just have to say, guys, and it's like silence. Everybody's looking. You're like, whoa. So things like that, their behavior in talks, which also then influences, of course, their participation. So you might have a country where the language level of the teachers might actually be superior, but they're so concerned about making a mistake or seeming, maybe that's a stupid question, I shouldn't ask the speaker, or maybe somebody's going to pick up on the fact that I have an accent when I'm asking that question in English. They don't talk. They just sort of, very few people, when you sort of ask opinions, so what do you guys think? What are some common qualities amongst young learners? And it's like, come on, guys, you all teach young learners. You're sort of waiting, and then you'll be in another country and you'll say, what are the qualities of young learners? And you're like, oh my goodness, there's so many people shouting out answers that you have to really calm them down. So I think things like that, there are sort of some general tendencies in countries. Like, I find that when I work in Asia, they're also very respectful. They're almost afraid to ask a question because they're not sure if the question is worthy of the speaker. And I'm like, I'm just a teacher like you guys. Come on, open up. Don't worry. Whereas, for example, like I said, I've worked quite extensively in Brazil. They are so open. They're so happy. They don't care if their English is good or bad. They'll ask you anything. So the culture of a country definitely influences their reactions to foreigners teaching them things or sharing things with them.
It's important to a certain extent. Again, we don't want to believe completely in stereotypes, but what you're saying is it's important to have expectations because, for instance, I mean, this is just exactly what you were saying, but just a different country. I was working with an academy in Taiwan, and
Yeah.
I asked the director before we began, I said, are the participants going to want to participate or are they very shy? And she said, they're
Exactly.
probably going to be very shy. And so that's how I had to, first of all, plan the presentation. I had
Yeah.
to know that they probably weren't going to intervene very often. And if they
Exactly.
didn't, I didn't need to take it personally. So that's another thing we had to be
Exactly.
very aware of.
No, I think that's an excellent point that, you do have to be aware of these things. Obviously, not everybody in Taiwan or everyone in Vietnam or everyone in Poland or everyone in Brazil behaves the same way, obviously. But there are tendencies and there are also cultural norms that might exist where, like you said in Vietnam, in Vietnam, Taiwan, Philippines, they're quite aware that they shouldn't be making a lot of eye contact with you, that they probably shouldn't be taking up your precious time and things like that. So there are things like that, that take place. And then the other thing, just before we go on, the other thing you do notice a lot, and which was quite difficult for me to get at the beginning, and again, this is without making any sort of comment about how people live or what their culture entails, but I do notice I've done a lot of work also in, in Africa, North Africa, Senegal, Yemen. I've worked in a lot of sort of Middle East countries, North African countries, and there it's also quite complicated at the beginning. There is some resistance. Oftentimes, we normally get over it quite quickly, but having a female trainer, that sometimes it's very good for the female students as there's a female trainer, but some of the male students, again, they've been sort of taught or educated that perhaps that's not the best source of information, or that there should be some distance between that woman on the stage and myself, and quite often they also influence the women in the group to not, like maybe a lady will put up her hand and say something, and the 5 rows of men in the front row will sort of look around like, how dare you, or what did you just say? And so again, I had to learn to sort of, this is not Canada, this is not right, this is not wrong, this is not good, this is not bad, this is how it is here. So get off your little Canadian high horse. I had a couple of challenging experiences sometimes where I was so like, why do the women have to sit in the back rows? You guys come up to the front. You guys were on time. Come up to the front rows, woman power. And then suddenly like been called out of the room by the director, like, what do you think you're doing? Like, that is not where the ladies sit. And I'm just like, oops, so you do have to be sensitive to these things. And I think that when I came from Canada into Greece, and at the time when I moved to Greece, it was very sort of macho society in the sense that, like women had their place and men had their place. And I sort of went in as this Canadian trooper, like, I'm here to change the world. I'm here to free women. And you cannot do that. Like, you cannot do that. Like, if you want to change things in a culture, it's got to come from within, and it's got to come very slowly from within. It's not about you just barging in and being like, well, in Canada, we do this. Well, you're not in Canada. You're in a village in Greece. You're in a town in, North Africa. You're in the middle of Yemen. Maybe it is not the time for you to be pulling your woman's lip thing. It's already an honor that you're here. Don't try to break down the wall. Just try to chip a little bit at the cement. That's all you can do right now. So.
And how often have you had to be very careful about dress?
Oh yeah, I got to be very careful about dress. I'm very conscious of my shoulder coverings, even when I'm doing anything that might be on an international platform.
And shoes as well, right? I was in Egypt. That I was in Egypt recently, and I couldn't wear sandals to the school. They would not let me, but I was glad to know that.
Exactly. And I know that, again, this is a touchy subject, because some people are sort of like, well, they should be learning about culture by me going in short sleeves. And I'm like, well, I don't think that if there were a culture where people taught topless, it would be effective if somebody came in and taught me topless. I would probably be distracted. And so if for a culture, my shoulder is to them topless, well, really, is my goal here for them to learn some things that they can do in the classroom, for us to share some ideas, for me to learn from them, for them to learn from me, or is it for me to say, I'm Canadian, I can show my shoulders? What's my objective here? And if my objective is that they're going to learn how Canadians dress, they know how Canadians dress. They watch TV, they know. So why, if I'm trying to, like you said, build empathy, build rapport, am I going to make good impression on them if I'm coming in my flip-flops, in a tank top and a mini skirt to do a session in a country where the norms of the society are that women should be more discreetly, well, women and men, because it's not like you go to these countries and the men are in t-shirts and shorts and the women are in long skirts. Like, I mean, the men are also in suits and ties. So why would I then go in beach wear thinking, oh, they'll get over it, I'm Canadian? Well, maybe I should at least try to be on a common ground with them so that at least we can start on a good foot. And I quite often just think of it as a topless thing, because I know that in some places, not having your head covered or your arm covered or whatever is for them the same as pretty well going and stark naked. So why would I want to start off on that foot? What will I gain?
Right. And you're underlining the fact that language is not just about the words, it's about the entire culture. It's about really respecting and learning about anywhere, the country. It's more training. It's more than just going in and sharing information. It's about learning the culture first and respecting it so that they are relaxed enough to learn from you.
Exactly. And I think this is a very sensitive topic. And I think that I have had debates with other trainers over the years with things like that. But in my own opinion, I try to be respectful. And that doesn't mean that I necessarily try to dress like people in that country dress. But if, I've never gone to a session in North Africa ever, or in Senegal or in Yemen without having long sleeves on or the, halfway sleeves. I just wouldn't even cross my mind because I know that could be offensive for them. So.
Well, it's an underlining idea in any situation, be respectful. And again, once we're respectful, then there's a lot more connection. And I was going to mention also, I love this book. I just happen to have it next to me. It's Edward T. Hall. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
No, I don't know it. I'm going to write it down.
Yeah, I love his books. I learned about him a long time ago when I was doing some research. And and it's pretty much what you're talking about. He wrote in the 1940s about high context and low context cultures. And it's another thing that we are both aware of, and trainers need to be aware of it. And the idea is, for instance, Americans are very low context. What we say is what we mean. And I'm from New York, which means what I say is exactly what I mean. And it gets me into trouble. And in Canada, it's probably a little higher.
Yeah, we're probably a little bit the other side,
Right. But we live in Spain, and it's more of a high context culture. You need to read between the lines, and the Asian cultures are even more. And so it's another level of language learning.
Right? For sure.
And you've traveled.
Sometimes it's not actually even just language, it's just communication. It's like what you were saying before, understanding and being understood,
and being aware of the subtle differences. You may have teachers who really need something, but their culture will not permit them to say it directly. And so we need to intuit a lot of times. So we're talking a lot about training, and I find that fascinating. I didn't think I didn't mean to. And yeah, it's perfect.
That's fine.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, it's perfect because you are a trainer. And the next question has to do with training. Can you give us some unique stories about your training? What has jumped out for you? What is one of your favorite stories about working with teachers around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel so incredibly fortunate. Like I was with Ed Dudley in Vietnam, and here we were, these two white people with blonde hair, blue eyes, and we had this little Vietnamese hostess, and she was just a fireball, that woman. And she would take us to these incredible places. Like, I mean, just like, down the back alley, through this, through that, somebody weaving a basket, cross over a little river, go through a barn and get to this amazing restaurant where, like, there was no foreigner there in like 5 kilometers. You were like, what is this place? Everything written in Vietnamese. And then she'd be like, this is fish sauce, put the taco in the fish sauce sort of thing. And I was like, wow, I would never, ever have had this opportunity. Or like, going to like some little hidden, capoeira bar in Brazil or things like that. So it wasn't only the actual experience with the teachers in the classroom, working with them or working with their students or working in the teacher training. It was also the experience of, especially in countries where I do longer courses where I may be working with the teachers 3 or 4 days, you go into their lives. Like in Yemen, I was taken into their homes. I was traveling around in cars with them, going out for family dinners with them. And you're like, what tour company would ever have been able to offer me this inside look into a culture like I'm being paid to do it? I was like, this is crazy, and so I just feel so incredibly fortunate. So there were all sorts of things. Like, I mean, Yemen was one of my favorite trips, traveling through Yemen, and everybody's like, don't go, red alert, tourist alert, people carry swords there, you're going to die, don't go to Yemen. And it was one of the most wonderful trips I've ever been on. The teachers were wonderful. The food was wonderful. The people were wonderful. I've had some really funny experiences teacher training when there were blackouts. I had one in Poland where we were doing how to do the Polish official exams, and all of the Polish official exams, and the lights went out. And I was like, oh my God. So I had my PowerPoint in front of me to read off, but of course I couldn't read any of the instructions for any of that. And it was just amazing to see how empathetic the teachers were towards those situations. I had a big blackout in Brazil as well, and we were in one of these sort of modular classrooms in a building where there were no windows. So like the lights went out and it was like, okay, pitch black. And we ended up having to do the session sitting cross-legged in the hall. 30 of us sitting in the hallway cross-legged, and they just took it all in stride. I took it in stride. And so I think I've always been impressed by the resilience of teachers when I'm traveling around the world, the adaptability. I've always been impressed by their vocation, by their dedication, like the empathy, the flexibility, the interest, the extreme interest in the English language and in our culture. I mean, I was just like, wow, amazing. I had some really good experiences, actually. And a lot of really good food as well. So, I love the coffee breaks at those places that you get, what's that? Oh, that's cashew juice. And that's, a special date-filled pie or whatever it was. So yeah, meals and nice people were also a huge highlight of all the traveling. So yeah, fascinating experiences. Feel very fortunate.
But you've just proved exactly what I started with, is so many experiences. Tell me, what would you like to do in the future? What are your dreams right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I've actually stopped dreaming as much, and I start living day by day and just living it day by day. I'm very happy to be where I am. I as you know, I have a little beach house I've been living in for a little while, and my priorities have changed. I used to be wanting to, I want to make sure I get this book written and that project done and do this training trip, and now it's just whatever comes along will come along. And
yeah, and we're really lucky to have your energy in all those different areas.
No, and God, and I mean, you're a jack of all trades as well, eh? You're in a lot of different things, and I'm really impressed by this project you're working on. I think it's wonderful. I love the name of the project, and then every time I see your little things coming up on Facebook, I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Oh, who's that? Oh, that's, there's a really nice wide range of things. It's not just, grammar games for intermediate classes. It's empathy, stories, you've got all sorts of things on there, bullying, really nice range of topics and speakers. So I feel really honored to be part of the Doorways project.
Oh my goodness, that's so nice of you. Love that. I'm honored to have you. I just love highlighting educators. There's such a variety, and so I love doing it. Nina, we have to have you back sometime soon and talk about more. But thank you so much for telling us so much about you. And we need to have the links. Sure, but you're going to send me links where people can find you, because you have an incredible webpage, and they'll be able to contact you and see all of your projects, right?
Great, Donna. Well, thank you so much for everything. Great to see you again.
You too.
For everything. Bye-bye.
So that's our chat with Nina Lowther. Can you just feel her enthusiasm and vibrancy through her voice and stories? And there are so many more. You need to find her and bring her to your school to get the full benefit of her experience, energy, and joy for education and life. For more inspirational conversations like this one, please go to Doorways to Learning with Donna, and for activities to scaffold information in any country and culture, go to scaffoldingmagic.com. In the meantime, have fun in your classes and at home, and see you soon for more.